Army, and welcome to another Roaring Stories online author event here at Roaring Stories, Balmain's only independent bookstore, and on Facebook Live. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and future. Now, if you're here in the audience, please remember to turn your phones on silent. And if you are taking photos, make sure you keep your flash off. But feel free to share on our Instagram, Twitter and Facebook pages, Roaring Stories 268. And don't forget to hashtag Roaring Stories and Bluebird. Now, we'll have time for questions later in store and on Facebook Live. So if you'd like to ask Malcolm a question about Bluebird, post your question in the comments on the live stream and I'll read them out for you later. Now, do either of our guests tonight need any introduction? Not only are they acclaimed journalists and award-winning novelists, Malcolm Knox and Michael Robotham are denizens of Sydney's northern beaches, where Malcolm's debut novel, 2000's Summerland, was set, and to which he returns with his new novel, Bluebird. Overlooking beautiful Bluebird Beach, one of the beach's last untouched corners, where old places and old ways seem to keep getting demolished for water views and three-car garages, Gordon Grimes is trying to hold the once beautiful lodge, his family and his life together, even as they all seem to be falling down around him. In what promises to be this summer's big beach read, well, if we can get there with the restrictions, Bluebird is a biting satire on the shadows behind Sydney's shiny, sun-kissed facade, and a moving meditation on those old Aussie ideals of egalitarianism and mateship that seem to be getting as flipped as easily as a deceased estate on a Luca road. Malcolm is one of Australia's best known and most admired journalists and writers, winner of multiple awards including the Ned Kelly Award, Human Rights Commission Award, Walkley Awards for Investigative Journalism and Sports, as well as being shortlisted for the Prime Minister's Literary Award, the New South Wales Premier's Award and the Queensland Premier's Award. He's the author of 6 novels and has written dozens of non-fiction and sports books, especially about cricket. Michael Robotham is one of the world's best and best-selling crime writers. After a long and acclaimed career as a journalist in Australia, the UK and the US, he co-wrote the memoirs of some of the world's most famous and best-known politicians, pop stars, psychologists, adventurers and showbiz personalities, with combined sales of over 2 million copies. After his first novel, a psychological thriller called The Suspect, caused a bidding war at the 2002 London Book Fair, Michael's bestsellers such as Lost, Shatter and Life or Death have been acclaimed by readers, critics and prize panels alike, including winning the Ned Kelly and the prestigious Golden Dagger Award. 5 of his Joe O'Loughlin novels have been adapted into TV movies in Germany, and his thriller, The Secrets She Keeps, was recently adapted into a mini-series in Australia, the UK and Ireland. His new book, When She Was Good, follows the Gold Dagger-nominated Good Girl, Bad Girl. And from one insular peninsula to another, welcome, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's an enormous pleasure to be here. There has been a perennial search in Australia that has gone on ever since Keith Miller hung up his cricket boots. And this is a search that has taxed the greatest selectors and minds we've had. And it's a search for a truly great Australian all-rounder. Now, other countries have produced phenomenal all-rounders. I mean, even England has had sort of Ian Botham, Ben Stokes they now have, Andrew Flintoff. India had Kapil Dev, Pakistan had Imran Khan. Aside from the fact we have the greatest female all-rounder in the world in Elise Perry, pound for pound perhaps the best cricketer in the world, someone who can change a game with bat or ball in a session, we have always struggled, it seems, to find a truly great all-rounder, despite our dominance. Whereas, with Malcolm Knox beside me, he, I think, is Australia's true literary all-rounder. there is nothing this man, I'm going to embarrass him tonight because he's a very shy man anyway, so I'm going to embarrass him. He'd be embarrassed enough by being here to begin with. I'm going to list some of his accomplishments to illustrate the point. He's a former literary editor of the Sydney Morning Herald, Walkley Award-winning journalist who exposed one of Australia's greatest ever literary hoaxes. He revealed that Forbidden Love by Norma Corey was not a shocking real-life story of an honour killing, and betrayal, but fiction created by a woman who had grown up in Chicago rather than Jordan. He has been a ghostwriter, as I have been. We have very similar, we're not only follically challenged, we've had very similar careers. I'm a more handsome version, but we both began our career at Fairfax in Sydney. Malcolm began with the Sydney Morning Herald. I began with the Sun. Different newspapers, I know. The old Sydney Sun. But by the time Malcolm began his journalistic career, he'd written one-act plays. He went on to be named as one of the Sydney Morning Herald's best young novelists, Australia's best young novelists. He's a must-read columnist. He's one of Australia's finest cricket writers. I can't claim any of that. I can't claim any of those attributes that he has. I'm in awe of Malcolm's work ethic. I'm in awe of the quality of his writing across so many different fields. How he juggles his fiction and his non-fiction. His newspaper columns with his TV script writing. I honestly believe there's nothing that he could not write, from a haiku to sonnets to free verse. He could write a shopping list and make it sound like Shakespeare, but do it in a uniquely Australian way. And I can write one thing at a time. This man seems to be able to write his novels and his columns and his non-fiction all at the same time. It's astonishing. I know that's embarrassed him. We're not launching a shopping list tonight. We're launching Bluebird, which is an exceptional novel. It's a wonderful example of what Malcolm does so well. I read it in draft form, and I read it again over the past week. I felt as though in a way he was documenting my life. I spent a lot of my childhood in a place called Coffs Harbour. Now, when I went to Coffs Harbour, it had a population of less than 10,000. By the time I left, it had a population of over 70,000. It was the fastest growing town in Australia for about a decade. And it was because every beach became a resort. It was high, the property developers came in, and there are high-rise built up everywhere. This is sort of what happened in Coffs Harbour is a sense exactly what Gordon Grimes is trying to stop happening to Bluebird. And I saw it happen to this beautiful place that I grew up in. This sleepy beachside community that was just transformed. And I thought of all those things while I read Bluebird, and I looked at it through the eyes of Gordon Grimes, and he is a Don Quixote figure who is railing against this onset of progress and desperately clinging to the past, trying to save his beloved lodge, which is this sort of drop-in centre for every ratbag, ragtag, surfer, unemployed wastrel that Bluebird has to offer. The lodge is falling apart, and most of the people that go there are falling apart. It is a beautiful, beautiful novel. It is part myth, it's part memory, and it's part melancholia. And I think he's done a remarkable job. And before I begin talking to Malcolm about the book, let me introduce him, the author of Bluebird, and I know he wants to say a few words thanking people. Ladies and gentlemen, Malcolm Knox.
Thank you for ending. Unfortunately for you, Michael, a lot of my close friends and family are here, and they're all just shaking their heads. No, you've got this completely wrong. I am embarrassed, but I've been embarrassed, I guess, by the kindness of friends throughout the process of writing this book, and they were the people I want to spend just a moment or two thanking. The question gets asked for a quite a fat book like this: how many drafts does it take to finish it, and how long does it take? I'd been working on it for about 18 months, and I think I'd done the 4th or 5th draft when I was pretty sure I had it nailed, and showed it to the first person I trusted to show it, and that was my friend Christos Cholkas, who many of you will know as a writer who's almost famous for the blood and guts he spills onto the page and the innards that become external to him. What you might not know about Christos is that he's an absolute expert craftsman. He builds all that passion on a foundation of the keenest mastery of the art of novel writing. And when he read my 4th draft, which I thought was pretty good, he had suggestions that were so profound they transformed it and sent me away for another couple of months to work because he hit so many nails on the head with the keenness of his intellect. The next person I took it to, which was at draft 5, was Michael Robotham, and I turned up to meet Michael at a cafe in Mona Vale after he'd read the 5th draft, and I brought out a bottle of champagne to thank him as we met. And the first thing you said was, maybe hold it until later. You might not want to give it to me once you've heard what I have to say. And of course, his suggestions again were constructive, to say the very least. I believe, there's really only one working philosophy of writing that functions, and that is to give the reader a reason to turn the page to the next page, and that unites all good writing, all attractive writing, all quality writing, whatever its genre and type. And I was fortunate to have one of the world's best as a good friend who I didn't feel embarrassed about asking to read my undeveloped work. And Michael, like Christos, gave me the benefit of his mastery of story. This is a complicated book in that it has a lot of characters, it has a lot of story going on, and Michael was so on top of that. So he got the bottle of champagne, and my eternal thanks. Draft 7 and 8 went to a friend of mine, John Edwards, who is a real natural storyteller, and also John is a character out of the novel, and he regales you with stories of the old beach culture all the time. And I did want a kind of a sniff test from John, as well as the fruits of his experience as a storyteller. I thanked him today, and he said, "I did bugger all." He might think that, but I think otherwise. Up to draft 9, I was ready to show Lynn Tranter, my agent, which was time for some tough love. When you're writing a book that's essentially a humorous book, the ultimate stress test is to give it to somebody who has temporarily lost their sense of humour. And Lynn Lynn was the perfect stress test in it. She's saying, "Oh, Gordon, he's awful. I mean, his father, he's terrible." And character after character, I was laughing, and Lynn, I think, was groaning and squirming. But the thing about having such a tough read from Lynn in her frame of mind at that time was how valuable it was later, because it shook out of me any kind of pretension that I'd got it, and if I could win Lynn over, I could win anybody over. And thankfully, when she read it again, the smiles had come out, and you're still saying they were awful, but you're saying awful with a chuckle. Finally, by draft 10, I was ready to take it to Winona, who normally figures much earlier in the process. She was really busy, and I was very nervous about showing it to her because she is honest. She cannot hide her emotions when she reads something. And as a byway, while thanking Winona, I'd also like to thank our book group that we participate in. It's Winona and me, Stevie Harris, Helen DeMesta, Sarah Hopkins and John Hopkins, who Sarah is also a novelist, and I'm sure she'll endorse this. Everybody needs reinforcement that books matter. And every time we meet as a group, there is such respect for books, such great choices, particularly from John Hopkins, choice of the year, year after year. But to all of you, I thank you. We've read so many great books together, and Winona and I are lucky enough to be part of that group with you. So Winona's reading, I went away for a while to let her read it in peace. Her enthusiasm was genuine, and I kind of got tingles for the first time after somebody had read this book, because she really did seem to like it and to tell me it was good and it was working. And I know she doesn't lie, and if she tries to lie, she's pretty bad at it. And I just felt really by draft 10 the return of that confidence that I had very early and had misplaced along the way. John Casimir was the reader of Draft 11. John is the Jack Gibson of book feedback, short, to the point. He said about 3 things. That's it. Do this, do this, do this. Yep, okay. Gold, gold, gold. Thank you, John. Draft 12 went to Jane Palfreyman, my ideal reader. Now, as always, if I write a book with anybody in mind, it is Jane. And it's a publisher-author relationship, but it's also a personal relationship. And Jane, if it doesn't work for you, you know it doesn't work. For me, respect to everybody who helps and everybody who I'm indebted to. But Jane, you know, if I'm not there, if a book isn't there for you, then I know the truth of it. So thank you, Jane. Jane then took over the marshalling of the publication process from Alan Lumlin, which brought in the remarkable Ms. Laveau, Ali Laveau, as an editor. You were astonishing. I feel so lucky to have had you. Your eye for detail, and your eye for detail. It almost got to the point where I was worried about your mental health, because you knew this book so much better than I did. And you were able to say, but what you've said, what you've written here on page 332 contradicts 2 words that you let slip on page 74. And I'm thinking, what? You know, well, I can't remember that. And this happened again and again and again. And Ali, I don't know, I cannot thank you enough, because it is a big book that required expertise from an editor beyond any degree that I've ever experienced before. So thank you. The final drafts, 17 and 18, were shepherded through by Jane and Ali and Krista Munns. And Krista can't be here, but I hope she can see me at home. Krista, as part of the Alan Lumlin team, again, I've never experienced a better editor taking over the process. So thank you, Krista. And then, of course, the fabulous Christine Farmer, post-publication and around the time of publication, taking everything forward. So that was more than a minute of thanking, but there were so many people to thank, and it got to draft number 18 before.
Wow.
And it's Bluebird 18, which was the last one that I sent off, and it's dedicated to my family. My daughter Lillian is in her 18th year, and my son Callum is 18. I am about to become a multiple of 18. We are 18s between us, and Winona, of course, is 18. But it's to my extended family as well. My mum, all of the clan who will eventually get around to reading it. So thank you to all of you, and thank you particularly to my family for giving me so much material. But thank you all for being here.
Thank you. 18 drafts, wow. Now, let's talk about Bluebird. I know you're a surfer, and from the opening pages it feels as though you know this place so incredibly well. I mean, the iconic Bluebird Beach in Ocean City. First of all, tell us, in your mind, where is this, and how well do you know this place?
Well, it started with a house, and there is a house at Freshwater Beach, which is one of the places where I surf, and the house has been renovated now, but it was for many years just a broken shack halfway up at the cliff face, and it had no access other than climbing up from the beach or climbing down between other houses from the street. And I was always fascinated by not only the question of how it got there and how somebody bribed someone else to get permission to build it, but also the life that may have been lived there. And
so you'd be out in the surf,
I'd be out
bobbing around, looking back at this house, waiting for a wave.
Yeah, just wondering. So it, and of course the house is a symbol of everything around it, because it's like these other blocks of flats and lovely old houses that are being knocked down for monstrosities, are physically climbing down that cliff face to menace the lodge, and in my vivid imagination, to menace a way of life.
No, it's funny because because it's such a vivid image you created of the lodge. This place, this drop-in centre for all these aging surfers, and I spent a lot of time walking Palm Beach, and there's a headland at Palm Beach which is known as Pill Hill, because it's been taken over by so many specialists that have built these fancy houses, medical consultants. They call it Pill Hill. And they're built beautiful, but and they're all mega rich. But there's always one or two beach shacks that hang on, that cling to that cliff face. And you're wondering, oh God, they must be offered a fortune for those places, But they're hanging on. They're not taking the money, and you can see the access is either an inclinator going up, or it's a rickety set of stairs going down, which is the lodge.
Yeah. Well, hanging on, as you put it, and that's also true about the people, and you go into the water around, the south end of the northern beaches where I live, or anywhere up the north end, or in Bronte, or Maroubra, Cronulla, all the way around Sydney, and in fact, Coffs Harbour, Gold Coast, the entire Australian coastline, and you get this, really is a melting pot of different kinds of people who move in and are in flux through these coastal communities. But the voices that always stand out to me are the voices that are old Australian voices, and tough voices, and voices that reverberate with generations of habitation in this place. And
so these characters, you right from the opening chapters in this Bluebird Beach, we meet Redcap and Dog and Nut and Japan Ned and Toncha Man and Snake, and straight away I'm conjuring up, the old clubbies and their budgie smugglers and wrinkled like lizards, and they inhabit these places, you must see them every day you go surfing, do you?
Yes, well, Winona and I saw Snake the other day, and good old Snake, he works in a cafe at one of our local beaches, and I was watching him thinking, mate, you've got no idea. And I hope you never do. because they'll sit there and you know, there is a guy who walks around with a red cap who, in my mind, he's red cap.
Okay.
And he wears a red cap every day, and he doesn't surf. He just hangs out at the surf. And I've sat near him in cafes and I've heard his conversation, and then I've superimposed an entire life onto him as I have several
Do you ever,
other people. But
do you think, are you likely to have any of them read the book and see themselves? Or have you hidden them well enough, do you think?
Well, what they would see is bad likenesses of themselves. You know, it'd be like, you know, Brad Pitt was playing me. And I think, you know, he's wearing my clothes. You know, I can see a strong resemblance, but he's not quite there. And I fantasize about these you know, people from the community that one day they kind of debrief. And I think, oh no, he screwed me up badly.
It could be,
you know,
yeah.
you know, I'm going to get him. I'm going to get him if I can
it
find
could
him.
be like, I remember a very old journalist mate of mine, Matthew Condon, wrote a series of short stories at one point, and one of them was about, I mean, shamelessly, it was about a mutual friend of ours, a very, very angry drunk. And he was very concerned that this person would read the story and recognise that it was them.
Yeah.
And think, oh my God. And of course, the book came out and he got the phone call. We have to meet now. And you think, oh my God, he knows, you know, he knows. And he got to the pub and straight away he gets stabbed in the chest saying, that story, that character you wrote. And he's thinking, oh God, what am I going to say to him? That was the best character you've ever written.
Yeah.
He just did not see that it was him.
Yes, that might happen.
Now, it's interesting, you know, I mean, the lodge rep for Gordon Grimes, the main character in this book, is, I mean, there are so many wonderfully drawn characters, but Gordon is a man that's clinging to the past. I mean, for the lodge, for him, it's where he lost his virginity. It's where every major event of his childhood and his life has taken place in this property, and it's now it's not only crumbling and threatening to disappear down the headland, but it's under threat from all sorts of other forces and developers and whatnot. I mean, you do paint a picture of progress, which seems quite irredeemably bleak and unstoppable. Is that how you see it? I mean, are you a nostalgic man that looks at all these changes on your beaches and thinks, I wish I could hold back the tide?
Well, when you're watching Womberall falling into the ocean, or Narrabeen and Coleroy crumbling away, it's hard to be optimistic from the, you know, the side of what humans have done to the environment that you know, is eating away literally at beaches from one side, and then what we've done to the built environment on the other side is, you know, causing a kind of a literal squeeze on coastal land. I'm not that much of a nostalgist myself. I didn't actually grow up at the beach, so my myth is of an inland person, unlike Gordon, who's you know, been at the beach for, you know, not just himself but generations beforehand. What I wanted to get into was the uncertainty about what it is we're actually nostalgic for. Everybody's idea of a place is conditioned by their experience and their hopes. And, you know, Gordon's hopes are embodied in so many ways by his son and his goddaughter who turn up. And he's between the generation that kind of, you know, pissed it away and the generation that may take it back or may, you know, create their own future. So I don't think I'm a pessimist so much as I feel when I'm at the beach, I feel the squeeze, I feel the competitiveness. And, you know, you mentioned I'm a surfer, I'm a very poor surfer, but when I go out in the water, partly because I'm a poor surfer, I'm constantly being outraced by others.
I mean, so many of your novels, from Summerland, you know, to The Life, I mean, they've revolved around the beach. You say, I mean, you didn't grow up on the beach, but it seems to be fascinating. I mean, what does the beach represent to you?
Yeah, well, as a novelist, as you know, you take the material that is at hand for you, and it's such a perfect laboratory for what I want to put characters into. And really, in this book, I'm talking about family and generations, and the so-called sandwich generation, and all of that stuff. And what I hope I'm talking about is the real anxieties and challenges that people we live among face every day. Put them in that beachside environment. It's like you're a dramatist with a stage where you can place the environment around the people that is going to cause the pressures that then enable you to see how those people respond. And
it's interesting. So many of the men that go to the lodge, these guys, they're middle-aged, they're unemployed, or they're living with their mothers. I mean, they're not all of them, but they're quite a sad. They've got a sad lot.
They're a dying tribe, and I'm not particularly nostalgic for the past, but nostalgia for the past is the only thing holding a lot of them together, and they can't afford to live in the place anymore, so they need to make compromises to be there, to hang on to their own souls.
It's interesting. There's a wonderful line. I'm going to quote. We've talked a lot about toxic masculinity over that. Not we haven't, but it's been a huge issue over the past decade, and sort of white male privilege. But it's people like Gordon. He's lost his career. He was a journalist, and obviously newspapers are crumbling. He's lost his career. He's lost his marriage. The one thing he's got to hold on to is the lodge. It seems to be the one thing that he's hanging on by his fingertips, really. And it's almost as though he's in the grip of a midlife crisis. That feeling of having reached a point in your life where you look and think, well, hold on, I had so many dreams and aspirations. I'm now closer to death than I am before. I missed all those things I dreamed of doing, I didn't do.
This is why Lynn wasn't laughing.
But it's incredibly funny in Poyga. It's an incredibly funny novel, but it does tackle some, there's a sadness there as well,
The generations on both sides of him are still alive, so there's probably a bit of identity crisis in there. Where do I stand? Because I'm still here to care for my parents. I'm still here to try to shepherd my children through to adulthood. Where am I? I'm in a kind of a limbo between them, where I'm both needed and a fulcrum of this family, and yet also somewhat invisible, and both necessary and superfluous, and that takes obviously a lot of pages to play out in the book, but that's really at the heart of it. Just like his sense of stubbornness and will and love for this place, caught between that and the deeper questions of what am I really hanging on to? Am I hanging on to a myth? Am I hanging on to something for someone else's mythology? What am I really looking for? And that's the psychodrama for Gordon and those about him. It's a psychodrama for Kelly, his wife, as well, writ small.
I think there's so many, the readers will get so much out of this, because whether it be people that have ageing parents they're trying to look after, and they'll see in Gordon trying to marshal his dreadful parents, they are dreadful, I agree. They are dreadful. But also, a son that's, reaching the cusp of manhood and all of that, and he's trying, and a wife that has decided she no longer wants to be with him. And, I've seen it described as a satire, and it is very... Did you set out to write a satire? I mean, because it's so... It hits the truth. I know great satire does hit the truth in so many ways, but this nails it so often, it seems too real almost to be called a satire. It doesn't seem so exaggerated that you... Most satire you think has got to be extremely exaggerated. I don't think this feels that exaggerated.
Yeah, I actually think all of the best satire in the mind of the creator is realism, and they've used a set of tools that we call satirical, but you know those creators are reaching for some kind of truth, and that double-edged language is the language they've chosen, but they're not trying to play a game with the reader. They're trying to reveal a truth to the reader. So I'm glad you made that comment, because it may be a satire as a byproduct of what I'm doing, but you know, it's just a story about people, and I love them, and I find them funny in their awfulness, and in fact, you know, you talk about the awful parents, but which are entirely fictitious. But you know, they're my favourite characters, and I think they are both satirical and true, and walking on that you know, razor's edge in many ways between you know, between both sides.
No, it's funny. Well, you say it, but I guess, I mean, I've got a mum with dementia who is the constant source of humour, because the stuff she does, you know, we joke as a family, we talk about the stuff she does, you know, and if you put it, I mean, if you strung it through in a book, people would think you were writing a satire, but these are all real stories about it, you know? And so every story you told about Gordon's parents, you know, I can sort of picture and believe, you know, and look, I know there's an artist who's involved in getting all those storylines to beautifully come together in the end. And in the final chapters involve a cricket game, but it's so beautiful that all these strands come together. You know, all these different characters you meet throughout the story. So there's obviously an artifice involved in marshalling all those characters together. But it just, you know, all of them and their stories feel so real. Yeah,
well, there's somebody in this room who can remain unnamed, but has been a great source of what you would call satirical, larger-than-life, extremely funny and not at all believable stories. And yet they've all happened to him. And you wouldn't believe it if you didn't know it. But that's as you know, that's what the novelist brings. The novelist brings the attempt, at least, if not the gift, sometimes the gift of rendering the unbelievable in a way that within the world of this book is believable and is coherent.
Does the pandemic, like we're living through, do you think make people more nostalgic? Because this is a book that I think a lot of people will read with a great sense of nostalgia, even though, I mean, they'll realise that Gordon is a Don Quixote-like figure that's tilting at windmills in his attempts to save the lodge and to save a past that really is more myth than reality.
Yeah.
Do you think it makes us more nostalgic?
Well, I don't know. I think it's too soon to tell. We don't know really how it's affecting us in those deep ways. But yeah, when the book was going off through the last stage of the process, I'm thinking, I'm writing about you know, the ills of plenty and you know, the pitfalls of this sort of rampant wealth gathering that we have in our cities and regions, at a time when that wealth is about to kind of collapse beneath us. So other than the anxiety that I was feeling I'm instantly out of date, I have the hope that people might read it as a form of escape.
Don't worry, I mean, my latest book, When She Was Good, is set in, it actually says in the opening chapter, May 2020. Okay, it's set in May 2020, and there is no mention of a pandemic. No mention whatsoever. And they did contact me just before it was published saying, what are we going to do? And I just said, well, I'm not going to change it all now. It would have meant going through and I said, I can't do that now.
You can't change the book, but you can maybe do something about the pandemic.
Yeah, well, I'd love to do that. So in the end, I just put something in the acknowledgement saying, please forgive me, this was written before, we were in lockdown.
Yeah.
But no, so listen, I'm going to quote this wonderful school principal called Jude Oxenford in the book, who says, I think she's talking to Gordon, if you could grow up in Bluebird and still consider yourself a battler, I congratulate you on achieving a feat of unseeing that would be admirably stubborn if it wasn't so pitiable. The inherited blindness, the quickness to disown privilege, the pride in a chip on the shoulder, the fetish for underdogism, the strident ordinariness. That's such a beautiful, beautiful paragraph. I mean, isn't that so Australian, though? That idea that even if we're growing up in these beautiful beachside communities,
Still find something to whinge about.
oh, we still find something to whinge about.
You said, I don't know if I've got any other commentary on that. But that's probably when I talk about the pangs of plenty that were our world until the we're absorbing the pandemic as we speak. That felt like a frontline issue to me every day, that we don't know how to handle our good fortune.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think it's also that idea of we dislike or mistrust tall poppies or know-it-alls or people who are too clever, and we disown privilege. And
But we don't like authors very much.
we like seeing ourselves as battlers and underdogs. Even so much of our political messaging is sort of aimed at the battlers, and whenever people are asked that question about whether they think what they think is an average income, they always pitch it well above what the average income is, and say, no, we're struggling on whatever our. It's a very Australian thing, or is it?
Yeah, but it's human too. And if you're thinking that the opposite is, I know the opposite is Donald Trump, isn't it? That wow, I am so fantastic. I am great, and I'm going to make a whole country as great as I am. If we're reacting in kind of fear or loathing of that mindset, maybe that's one of the great things about being Australian, that we do take ourselves down a peg.
And what about, when it comes to the beaches, though, I mean, you're talking about the fact you said you're probably being quite modest talking about your surfing prowess. There's a great deal of tribalism associated with beach culture. I mean, we all go back to the Bra Boys and Maroubra, and obviously then if you really want to go dark side, we go to Cronulla Riots. There is now, is that because you make that lovely references to the idea of people in Australia clinging to the coast, that in fact you're hemmed in, really. I mean, in the outback you've got all this space, but really when you cling to the coast, you are hemmed in.
Yeah.
You are backed into a corner, so to speak.
Yeah.
Do you think that fosters tribalism, or promotes it, or why is there so much of it about my local beach then?
Yeah, I wrote about that more directly in an earlier novel I did, The Life, which tribalism was the keynote of that book, and probably because of the time that was set in, which was a slightly earlier time. The time we live in now, it feels to me we're almost post-tribal, in that there are still people still wear the garb of tribalism, and there's a lot of anger out in the surf and all of that, and there's a bit of, piss off, you're not a local. But that's not the overriding ethos at the beach or in the surf. It's much more individualistic, I think, and I just want this wave, and I want to get ahead of you. So we're atomised into individuals and might momentarily coalesce into a tribe. But tribes are becoming absurd in cities because they're too small.
So it becomes more like closing state borders.
Becoming
state tribes as opposed to beach tribes.
It's a symbolic act. It's not a real act, tribalism. And these people in this book are post-tribal. They're not even hanging on to the beach. They're hanging on to the memory of the beach. It's 2 degrees separated from reality, and I think there are very, very few people around the beaches I go to, maybe more in the regions, but certainly in the city. There'll be a small tribe, but they're kind of irrelevant. They'll beat their chest from time to time, but they're not a real entity. They're a state of mind that shifts, and the majority, the other 98% of the people who are there are from Brazil. They're from Annandale.
So that line about the whole idea that, you know, if you want to learn to surf, a surfer's saying don't, because you don't want any more competition on the wave.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. Well, you know, my son Callum, he's a really good surfer, unlike me. He grew up at the beach. He learnt as a youngster. He's not tribal. He goes down for his own thing, and he'll make his own experience out of that. And yes, he's lived there. He'll have lived there longer than anybody. But that it's not about a battle.
It's not about tattooing your sort of postcode on your arm anymore.
I can't imagine anybody his age.
Yeah.
Someone his age, you can ask him, but it would be absurd. It would be so ridiculous for an 18-year-old to tattoo their postcode. You know, that's something 50-year-old men have.
Yeah.
And they're over.
They're
those
over.
men. Yeah.
On the other thing that, you know, obviously I was really interested in, obviously because, you know, I'm an old newspaper man like you. I mean, Gordon, you made him a journalist who, not a particularly good journalist, the way you described
Ex-journalist.
an ex-journalist, you know, but not a particularly hard-hitting journalist. He was sort of like a journalist who, if he got a story that was going to be too mean to anyone, he probably wouldn't publish it type journalist. And, you know, he lost his job when that newspaper sort of moved on. Although, no spoilers, what happens with his journalistic career we'll discover when you read the book. You're still working in newspapers, you know, but doing your columns, you know. Did you want to say, did you feel as though you wanted to say something about, you know, it's just saying what the reality of the situation is and where you see it?
Well, he worked for a Suburban newspaper, and yeah, certainly, if I'm going to be true to that world, I've got to show Suburban newspapers dying before our eyes, and I hope, you know, illustrating some of the consequences of that, which are not really for Gordon because he's done, but I think in that world and the social changes and you know, the building changes that are happening in these suburbs, you know, the need for accountability is only becoming greater, while our mechanisms of accountability are withering away. So I guess it's an obvious point, but it's a point that in the real world will probably need to be hit over the head with through corruption, through a point at which it becomes intolerable, and then local presses, obviously not in the old newsprint form, but local modes of accountability will have to rise again.
It's funny, until the pandemic, for all of sort of the travails of mainstream and the big media, local newspapers seem to be holding on, you know, because, you know, people, you know, we always, you know, where we live, the Manly Daily was the Bible. You know, you haven't made it ever as a writer until you've been written up in the Manly Daily. And they seem to be doing okay, but obviously that's changed dramatically over the last 6 months.
Yeah, and you know, the Manly Daily is owned by News Corp, a global corporation with its own you know, drivers for profit, and it's not concerned about whether you have your Bible up in Avalon. It's, you know, a tiny little cog in a gigantic machine. So what you're going to have, I hope, will be what we used to call citizen journalism, but it'll start as unpaid outrage motivated by people who might have a background in searching and inquiring that produce material out of, off their own bat.
Yeah.
And that's how they'll make their name, because they'll catch out councils, they'll do
Hopefully
what
there'll be enough
newspapers
of
did.
them. I'm going to ask for some questions. There might be some online, but there might be some from the audience as well. If there's someone that's got a question for Malcolm, I've got more questions if there's something online. Otherwise, is there something?
Thanks for the segue, Michael.
Okay.
Now, which camera am I looking into? Graham? Okay. Yes, I'm on. It's interesting you guys should be talking about tribalism, because we've had quite a few unfavourable comparisons to Queensland beaches, especially in regards to Australian beaches. Why do you think Michael from Pearl Beach asks, why do you think the New South Wales, beach shack, kind of second-hand furniture, little tumble down, the place that everybody goes to, even on Pill Hill, which isn't necessarily built up like the McMansions you might find further up the coast, across the border. Why do you think we have that phenomenon in New South Wales, and how long do you think it's got?
Do you mean why do beach shacks still exist? Well, they fulfil a need, and that need is becoming more and more urgent as, there's 2 shacks left on Pill Hill, and then there'll be 1 shack left, and then there'll be, the granny flat out the back of somebody's big house, and that'll be the last shack left. So it exists, and it has such a hold for us. Of course, we know it's dying.
Yeah, we don't have. When I look at even when we've moved back from London to the northern beaches, how many beach houses there were still up on those, in Avalon, Palm Beach and Wild Beach, and how slowly developers just moved in and bought them up and turned them into multi-million-dollar sort of mansions, and it's and it's there's no such thing as there's very few holiday shacks left anymore. Very few.
Yeah, and I guess the holiday shacks now are out of the cities, and they'll then become out of the regional cities, but we know that people are moving more and more into those places.
To a degree, when you look at the beauty of Bluebird in terms of, for everything that's happened at Bluebird Beach and Ocean City, there's a place north, so many miles north or minutes north, where it's still like the old Bluebird. So there are still places in Australia you can go that it's still little beachside communities that haven't been discovered yet that you can go to, and are still like the old days. And people will just keep, I think, gravitating towards those until the developers move in and they get yuppified, and then they'll move a bit further.
Yeah, and remote working is the worst thing for beach communities.
Does anyone else in the audience have a question for Malcolm or Michael? I've actually got a question, Malcolm. I mean, I'm presuming that Red Hat in real life has probably got a blue hat. But why did you change those very city locations to become Ocean City or Capri, which I recognised as being, Manly and Sydney itself?
Yeah, it's just that they became something different for me. Initially, they were, Ocean City was Sydney and Capri was Manly. But I needed to rearrange some of the furniture, and I guess I wanted to drill down a little bit beyond the Sydney we know. And if I was getting beyond that, I wanted to get into something that you could equally say about Coffs Harbour or the Gold Coast or Perth, or anywhere around this great coastline. And I couldn't call it Sydney. The more I was doing that, the less I could call it Sydney. And so it became Ocean City. And then there were actual buildings that had to be moved around. And, if I kept calling it Sydney, somebody would say,
it's very limiting, isn't it? When you name, all my novels have been set in real places. And it means you have to walk the streets, and you have to, make sure you can turn one way down that street, because someone will contact you and tell you, no, that's a one-way street. You can't turn right down there. But it is limiting because you can't, and well, the only time I do, it gets me into trouble occasionally. I remember at one point lawyers for the publishers contacted me and just saying that that house in the book, on that corner that you've described, the two-storey farmhouse, is that a real house? I go, yes. And that's exactly how you describe it and where it is. Yes. We have to change it. I said, why? I said, because you put three bodies in the front room. Someone owns that house, and they, and so you have to change it. Yeah.
Well, as someone who's helped bring down property values in my street, I'd love you to set a novel in my house, please, Michael. I'll put it on the sales campaign. Just one last question before we finish up. I've been reading your novels since Summerland, all the way back in 2000, Malcolm, and I'm really intrigued by the damaged, fragile paterfamilias who runs through all of your work, whether it's the Dr. Father with the porn secret, or the bigamist father in A Private Man, or the bigamist in The Wonder Lover. Who is this man, and why are you so drawn to him in your literature?
Well, I'm becoming him. and every...
I'm looking forward to Cullen's biography of you. Yes.
As you say, with 20 years, every year I get closer to that paterfamilias, and he draws me towards him as if I have his DNA.
Hopefully it's not sprayed too much around the place. Thank you so much for that wonderful, enlivening and very entertaining conversation. Please, Malcolm Knox, Michael Robotham. Malcolm talking about the awful parents in Bluebird reminded me a lot of Chapter and Verse by Philip Larkin, which he talked about that deepening sea shelf, coastal shelf of misery that your parents may sometimes hand over to you and possibly can provide great material for your next novel. But I hope that, like Gordon, you find your way back to shore, and if you do, make sure you buy a copy not just for yourself, but your other half when you go up to that beach shack or the Airbnb once restrictions are over. Remember, you can buy a copy in the store. It will be signed by Malcolm. He'll be available for a chat. And you can also buy it online or in the order form on Facebook Live. If you live in Balmain and surrounding suburbs, the postage is free. And if you go to the Roaring Stories website at roaringstories.com.au, you can sign up for our newsletter packed with exclusive offers, new releases, reviews, interviews with your favourite authors, news about events, and exclusively curated Spotify playlists and more. And I'd love to see you at another Roaring Stories online author event like next week on Tuesday the 15th of September, when the inspiring Aminata Conte-Berger and her co-author Juliet Ryden talk about Aminata's inspiring journey back to her homeland of Sierra Leone to build a better life for the women and children still recovering from the devastating civil war in her moving and powerful book Rising Heart. Described by Dame Quentin Bryce as searing and powerful, it's a story of courage and hope that will stay in your heart long after you've turned the last page. Go to our Facebook page or roaringstories.com.au for more details. Thanks very much.